understand sustainability. Today, in this lecture, we will be talking about how we have come to understand sustainability like we have defined in lecture 3. So what has been the history, the past, which has led to this definition of history? Why are we talking about sustainability the way we are talking about it as we are? So before we start looking at the historical perspective, let us look at how the world has changed, at least from the Industrial Revolution, the times when Industrial Revolution took place. So there was a larger focus on human health because there were some new diseases, mass diseases, which were attacking the mankind and which was a result of industrialization. So there were outrages of cholera. People were dying, children were dying. The cities had started to become filthy, dirty. People had very poor living conditions in Europe, almost all over the Europe. People were living in very bad conditions because of industrial revolution. There were filthy conditions, the children had no education, there were no proper education available for the children of these workers of these industries which were there. This photograph apparently is from a street in New York. We just cannot believe that this was the state at one point of time around industrial revolution. And that was when, and there were different notions of how women should look, how women should conduct. So there were social problems, there were environmental problems, there were health-related problems. And then that is when people started talking about, so there were many more issues. That is when people started pointing out the bigger problems, the major problems which were apparently causing a lot of misery to the humankind. To a date when we don't even have clean air to breathe. So gradually all these changes have happened, and that is why even our response has changed to how we discuss sustainability and what we discuss when we are talking about sustainability. This image shows the ozone hole. So what essentially has been the root cause of our problems if we look at the current situation? First of all, the population explosion. Now, population explosion itself is a result of several features. First, because of industrial revolution and in those times when there was this outbreak of diseases, the health facilities gradually have become better. There has been a greater research in medical science, and that is why the life expectancy of humans, that has increased. The death rate has decreased. There is an increased birth rate and survival rate. That is why world over the population has increased. It has just exploded. So there is automatically, even if we were continuing, our resource consumption rate was the same as that of the Industrial Revolution era, we would still be putting a lot of pressure simply because we are so much more in number. So one major cause is population explosion. The other one is people have departed from their traditional professions to more and more white-collar jobs, which has led to creation of certain kind of built environment. Pre-industrial era, where more and more people were involved in farming and primary activities, now more and more people are involved in the tertiary sector economy. Now that itself has implied an enormous pressure on the resource consumption. A farmland which is cultivated by 100 farmers is now being cultivated by just a handful of farmers, say 10. Now to do that, to continue farming, they require more and more sophisticated machines. So they are, instead of working by hand manually, they are more dependent on machines. On the other hand, the 90 who have shifted from farming as an activity to more white-collar job, office job, require more of office space, they consume more energy because of the kind of job they are involved in, and things have changed. That's the second reason. The third is for this reason that there are more people in white-collar jobs, people are shifting to urban centers. Because these urban centers are the places where more and more white-collar jobs are available. In villages or in suburban areas, in rural areas, such white-collar jobs are very less in number. The availability is very less. So, the urban centers are becoming more and more dense. It is anticipated that in the time to come, almost 70% of the world's population will be living in urban areas. So our urban areas are going to become denser, and hence more and more problems in urban areas are going to emerge. And because of this shift, more and more people are displaced within their countries because of the conflict and violence. Conflict and violence largely because of the conflict of availability of resources. There are less resources available, so there is a greater conflict and greater violence. When cities, the neighborhoods, the residential areas become bigger, there is less connectivity between humans, and that also leads to larger reasons for conflict and violence. So these are few major reasons why these problems are happening. These are the root cause. And as Ramchandra Guha very aptly puts it, currently we are more people who are producing more, we are traveling more, consuming more, excreting more. And there is a much faster rate of resource consumption than ever, and a much faster pace at which resources are being transformed into waste. So, the effects of these problems are visible. There are traffic congestions in urban areas. That's one of the problems which is there in urban areas. There are so many.
Okay, red is, of course, Ruru is my go-to
There is hardly any
lipstick.
space to breathe.
I know some people can't do it every day, and they really don't understand ombre. They'll just put on like a lip liner, another color lip liner. But the thing is with ombre, you always have to, what do you call this? Blot. You gotta blot it. You gotta blot your lips together so you can get a more like subtle look. So it just won't be like line and then red. Like the ombre, to get the ombre, you always have to blot. But yeah, I'm not doing ombre today. I don't even know where my red lip liner is. I just went straight red. That's my go-to. Y'all already know that. And yeah, so we're gonna finish up this lesson, and then we're gonna head to ATL Fresh and Free. I used, of course, MAC and a little Fenty Beauty. Well, I really didn't use Fenty Beauty, but I will since I said it. And I'm gonna wash my face when I get back this time because I'm breaking out a little bit. I got a bump there, and yeah, it's not a good look. Yeah, then I did a quick little clip in my hair, just clipped up my hair for today.
Discussions around it started happening from very strongly from the year 1962. That was the year by Rachel Carlson. And Rachel Carlson was a PhD scholar, and she was studying
Alexa,
the impact on
pause.
water bodies. She was studying the water bodies when she came across the impact of large-scale use of DDT, spraying of DDT in farming fields, and how this DDT, the eutrophication, led to killing of the aquatic life, which is what she pointed out, she researched, and she published in the book named Silent Spring. In 1962, Silent Spring created such an uproar, and people started knowing about the harmful effects of DDT from this book, and it was one event which triggered world over
We're learning
the impact
about
of the use of such chemicals and how industrial revolution
sustainable
is
architecture.
changing our lives.
It's an advanced
In
diploma in
1970,
sustainable
the
architecture.
first
That's the
Earth Day
course.
was observed. So from 1962, the revolutions which started happening, people started talking about the negative impacts of the use of chemicals and pesticides and industrial revolution on the environment. That is when, for the first time, Earth was recognized as an entity which is living, and first Earth Day was celebrated. It was formulated. In 1971, the Greenpeace organization was formed. The organization was formed as a protest to the nuclear tests which were to take place in Alaska, and two scientists, two crew members, they set out on a fishing trawler to protest that nuclear test. However, they still could not stop that. The tests were carried out, but the Greenpeace as a foundation, as an organization, it gathered a lot of support from Canada and US and rest of the world gradually. At the same time, in 1973, Chipko movement happened in India, and that was for the first time people realized across the world that sustainability, talking about sustainability, is actually not a full stomach phenomena, as many of the scientists argue. People think, prior to 1973 especially, people used to think that sustainability or discussions about sustainability are for people who already have the basic amenities in their life. So the Western world, the developed world, who has availability to clean water, clean air, and the basic amenities, they talk about sustainability because they already have their stomachs full. However, in this village in Uttarakhand, and prior to this, 1973, in 18th century in Rajasthan, similar kind of a movement had started, but in 1973, this Chipko movement in Uttarakhand came to the forefront, and the world knew about it, where these women, they hugged the trees, stopping them from being felled. And a lot of people died as a protest because this community had realized the importance of natural environment around them, and largely because their life was dependent on it. From economic point of view, because they were dependent on forest produce for their economic well-being. From social point of view, because their lives revolved around these forests. And of course, they placed a lot of importance, they placed a lot of emphasis on the natural environment which was around them. And culturally, socially, these trees, these forests were regarded very high in their culture. So Chipko movement for the first time revealed that everybody could talk about sustainability, and it is not just a full stomach phenomenon. In 1973, later, there was this OPEC oil embargo when the oil producing Arab nations refused to export the oil to US as a protest to American military support for Israel. And that is when, for the first time, the world realized that when there is no fuel, suddenly the life comes to a halt. And almost the world was paralyzed. Half of the world, especially the developed world, was paralyzed because they were so dependent on fuel. And the state, which was then only for the developed nations, is now almost everywhere. We cannot imagine our lives without electricity, without the conventional fuels. We cannot imagine our lives without petrol and diesel being there, because we thrive on that. When suddenly there was a crisis, oil crisis, that is when people started exploring the other means. That was the first time when people started talking about renewable energy. Till then, people had not realized the active or had not explored the active usage of sun, wind, water for producing electricity, for producing energy. Not as much. There were researches which were going on. So the use of solar energy, the use of hydropower, the use of wind energy was still being explored, but not as vigorously. Suddenly, after this oil crisis, the entire developed nation focused its energies towards exploring the renewable energy sources.
Okay.